Hi, I'm Richard, the founder of 10 Adventures, and this is the 10 Adventures podcast. Each week we talk to real people about real adventures as they explore this incredible planet we all live on. Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. Today we're talking about one of the most epic long-distance through hikes on Earth, New Zealand's Te Araroa. Here to talk about her experience is author Laura Waters, who wrote Bewildered, a book about her journey on this incredible trail. Hi, Laura. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for having me.
So first question, did I actually say it right? Te Araroa? Can you say it so we just have at least once correct on the podcast?
I say it, and a lot of the hikers say it, Te Araroa. If you were Māori, you'd probably put some other little twist on it, but Te Araroa.
Excellent. Okay. The first question was an easy one. Next question is a bit harder. What is Te Araroa? I'd heard about it, kind of this mythical walk, but can you give a bit of the details of this incredible through hike?
Yeah, it opened or officially launched in 2011. So it's a 3,000 kilometre route right from the very top of New Zealand at Cape Reinga all the way down to Bluff at the bottom of the South Island. And it sort of links a load of pre-existing and new trails together. It's intended as a natural, cultural and historical tour of the country. So it's not pure backcountry the whole time. You do a lot of gnarly backcountry, but there's also walks through, gravel roads through little villages and where you get to meet people and see Kiwi life. So it kind of gives you a really good overview of the whole country and an immersive experience.
And your book was published in North America in 2022. I know it won some really prestigious awards in Australia in 2021. But when did you actually do the walk?
It'll be 10 years ago this November that I did it.
Oh, wow.
I know. I set out when it was pretty much brand new and an unknown quantity. So, yeah, it was an amazing experience. And then it's been 10 years. It was one of the happiest times of my whole life. So it's fundamentally changed the course of my life. So, it's pretty significant, this anniversary for me.
And it's interesting because reading the book, it felt like this really rugged, raw path that there was no information for. And I thought, is this 2019 or 2018? Because I've heard about it quite a bit. And it explains that you walked it just, you're one of the first, the third summer it was open.
Yeah. 2011, late 2011 that it opened, and I did it 2013.
What inspired you to undertake this massive through hike, which is brand new as well? Where there wasn't a huge amount of information for you to glean on about all the details.
I know. It's funny, Richard. I think the trail chose me because I was at this point in my life. Well, for decades I'd been doing, the standard typical life, working, being productive, corporate job, but for so long I'd thought there's got to be more to life than this, and I felt like I was capable of more, and I didn't actually have a plan about doing a long distance hike. I wasn't looking for one, but when I was just reading in a hiking magazine one night about this new trail that had opened, and I immediately thought, that's it, that's what I want to do. And I thought it would have the right amount of challenge. Being in nature, I loved adventures, but hopefully not be so radical that it might kill me, So I just thought, that sounds like an epic adventure. I'm going to do it. And I got really single-minded about it. But so I wasn't looking for this hike, but as soon as I read it, that it existed, I wanted to do it.
And did you have an idea what you were looking for from the hike in terms of this life-changing event? Were you going into there saying this is going to change my life, or was it just trying to escape from a reality that many people have of a job that's good, but they're not passionate about, and a life that's good, but they're not passionate about? Where were you on that? Did you expect what came out from this?
I guess I went into it just wanting to shake myself up a bit, and feel alive and challenge myself. But the other side of it was that coincidentally, at that point of time in my life, I was not in a great headspace. I'd just come out of a pretty toxic relationship and suffering anxiety and depression and, kind of a PTSD type anxiety and depression. And so I really needed something to control, alt, delete my life. So it sort of came at the right time for me to let me escape and wipe the slate clean, as it were.
I don't know if lots of people would choose a 3,000 kilometer trek as how they're gonna focus on this. How prepared were you for this challenging trek, brand new, lots of route finding, mountains, coast, 3,000 kilometers? Is this something that was in your wheelhouse leading into starting this?
I've done, a good number of multi-day hikes, but nothing longer than 6 days and on well-established trails. So it was going to be a challenge for me, but I kind of went about it. I got myself I used to be a executive assistant to a CEO, so I got my spreadsheet out and wrote a list of the to-do list. Okay, get GPS, load the routes, learn a bit more about wilderness navigation, learn about river crossings, and I sort of tackled things systematically and tried to get as much knowledge in the bank before I set out. And in terms of physical training, I worked with a physio for about 8 months beforehand because I had a history of knee problems, and I just knew I needed to try and make myself as bulletproof as possible before stepping foot on the trail. And I did hike, I did walk sort of 2 hours a day for the 3 months leading up to it, just walking to work, and then doing some multi-day training hikes with all my kit on the weekends. But nothing really can prepare you for walking all day, every day for 5 months. It's just, I think the biggest thing you need for something like that is mental strength. And that is something that, at least one thing I'm good at. So just the ability to suck up the pain and push on and know that those hard times won't last. So, I did as much as I could to prepare. At some point, you just got to step foot on the trail and see what happens.
They always say the first step is the hardest. And so your first day, those first few steps, what was the feeling like? Was it the excitement? Was it fear? Was it something else?
It was totally surreal, to be honest. I set out with a girlfriend and I just felt like a total imposter, basically. I had new gear. I'd never used hiking poles before, so I had these poles because apparently you should use poles. But I was also, my mental state wasn't great. So I was just kind of hanging in there, basically, and just waiting to see how the trail would feel. So many unknowns ahead of me. I had no idea what was ahead of me, but I knew it was going to be an adventure. So, it was just a very surreal experience, not knowing what was coming.
You mentioned you were walking this. You started this with a friend, but that fell apart early on. What happened?
So the first section of trail is basically 100 kilometers of beach. And we started walking on the first afternoon and she was limping a bit. She sort of had a mystery hip pain. And the next day it was at a point that she said she didn't feel like she could continue on that day or in that section. And so she said, I'm just going to hitchhike off the trail, go back to town, see if I can find a doctor and fix this. And I'll meet you at the end of this 100-kilometer section. So she did that. And then when she got back to town, she hadn't found a solution. And she said, I'm just going to fly home and see my usual doctor, and then I'll come back and see you. And I was like, okay. And yeah, after I'd walked about 300 Ks, I got an email saying, sorry, I'm not coming back. So that was that. Yeah, I think she also wasn't in the right headspace. The hip pain went away, but she had some other challenges. So it wasn't in her stars to do the hike. But I'm grateful that she got me to the start line anyway.
And was it hard to keep going? You have this team atmosphere, doing something that's challenging, and then so early on, you're not a team. You're by yourself, and this isn't the Tour de Mont Blanc where you're seeing dozens or hundreds of people a day. It's it's at this point still not a super popular or well-known route.
To be honest, I felt like I had no option. Not that I would have anyway, because I needed this hike. I could not go back to the life I was leading. I was, with the anxiety, I was not functioning in normal life. I could not concentrate at work. I was just a wreck. So something had to give. I couldn't really just go back, but also I'd invested so much preparation into this. And to be honest, at that point when she left, I wasn't sure that I'd be able to do it because I knew it was incredibly challenging terrain, but I just thought I'll just give it a go and see how far I get. And I ended up getting the whole way.
Which is incredible considering, that challenge early on. You've mentioned a couple of times about, doing this, about anxiety, about kind of, stress. How did you know that this would impact your stress? There's lots of research now here in 2023 about the benefits of the outdoors and this type of, active travel in terms of mental health and stress. You were 10 years ahead of all this research. How?
I guess I've always been aware that nature makes me feel better. It's something much bigger than us. The first 100 kilometers on that beach where it was just me and the sound of the waves and the sound of a few birds. I mean, it was just blissful. I'd had so much overstimulation in the city, traffic noise, phones ringing, the buildings hum. You don't realize that until you're, out in the middle of nowhere and there's nothing there, but there's noise all the time, and smells and sounds. And so I felt better already after that first 100 Ks. And then it only took about 4 weeks. And then I suddenly realized, wait a minute, I haven't felt that anxiety for a while. And I was like, wow, is it really that easy? Just put me out in the wilderness for a few weeks, and something that I'd struggled with for well over a year is just gone. And it did sort of come and go for a little bit, but it just really, the peace of nature, I guess. Nature's like a tuning fork for me. So if you just tune into its energy, it just makes you feel a whole lot better and puts things into perspective.
I love that analogy. I've never heard that one, but there is something. We had a guest on recently, and she talked about a child who was mute. He hadn't spoken in years, and he did a 6-week adventure camp. And the last day, he just wouldn't start to talk. And they tried all this therapy, and it's not necessarily clear, in cases like that, but there's just something about being closer to nature, kind of maybe how we've evolved for thousands of years. I always just say it just feels right. Like I can't explain it. I can't put words. Your kind of tuning fork is a really good way. It just feels like that's the way we should be. And whether I'm riding a bike or walking or skiing or snowshoeing, there's just something about having no other sound and the outdoors that is just, how do we get more people to do this is maybe the question.
I know. Well, it's actually quite a big focus of my book, actually, that I want to show people the amazing benefits of it. And for me, it was just a really profound experience. The longer I spent out there, away from all of the noise of civilization, no media, no advertising, no messages coming at me all the time. And I really felt my whole identity just drop away. And I felt like I was just part of the land. I felt like I was part of the dirt and the rivers and the mountains and the rocks and the sounds of the animals around me. I just felt like, it's going to sound really weird, but I felt like we were all just one big pool of energy sort of thing. So when you feel like you're part of something much bigger, it just makes you feel a lot calmer and like you've got an anchor in life, I guess. So, it was really profound. And I've tried to describe it in my book, but I think it's hard unless you actually experience it for yourself. So I'm actually really driven to get more people inspired to get out in nature. Sense
of connectedness. I've heard a guide who would spend, a couple months every summer up on these high glaciers exploring on his own or with a couple friends. And he had a very similar way of describing it, which, I think there's lots of people that feel that way. I'm interested a little bit in the details of the trail because I know some people are listening to this thinking, I want to do this. Can you maybe just share a little bit about, what it's like to sleep? How long are the resupply points? And I think a little thing hit me with the river crossings. Maybe talk a little bit about that, but, just share the details that the average person probably wants to know.
Yeah. So the trail roughly goes through or near a town once a week on average. I think the longest stretch I had to carry food for was about 10 days. Only needed to do a post ahead a food box in one spot in the South Island at Arthur's Pass. But the rest of it, you can just resupply on the way, which makes things handy. So, yeah, every day you're just walking, all you go is to find somewhere to put up your tent at night. In the North Island, it's a lot of just wild camping. There's not really many official campsites and not so many huts. A lot more huts in the South Island, backcountry huts. But in the north, you are just trying to find a little patch somewhere where you can put your tent up, and hopefully near a river, or maybe you've just walked through a tiny little township and you can fill up your water at a park tap, and then you just go and slink off into the bush somewhere and put your tent up. It's pretty unformalized, shall we say. And then in the South Island, probably maybe 70% of the nights you can get in backcountry huts. And New Zealand's got this great system. You just get a 6-month pass. It was about $100 when I was there. And you can stay, unlimited stays in these backcountry huts. And some are, no more salubrious than a garden shed, and others are like double glazed, awesome palaces with, a fireplace inside, and staying a lot of huts in the South Island because the South has a lot more mountains and sort of wilder, more exposed terrain. So
the other question was just, it seemed in your book, there's the river crossings. It seems something where in a lot of, even in Canada, most of the routes, that parks will put up a bridge over, treacherous river crossings. In Europe, there's always bridges. It seemed like there were some pretty treacherous river crossings, and that seemed like, as a reader, is like that seemed a bit worrying when you don't deal with those in a lot of other places on Earth.
Yeah, I think Kiwis are sort of famously hardy, and they just expect you to be able to deal with these things. And, there are a lot of swing bridges, just suspension bridges made of mesh that are sort of wide enough for a boot. There's one 3-wire bridge where you actually stand on a wire and hang on to 2 other wires as you cross. And then there's a lot where you just have to wade through. So you do need to sort of take care on those crossings. But, there's so many, you just kind of sort of toughen up and get used to it. I always kept my boots on because the water is so cold and the rocks are slippery, and it's just more secure to just wade through with your boots on, and you just zone out to the discomfort, and it really wasn't an issue. And there's a lot of sections, say in the South Island, where it's just easier to walk up the river maybe for 5 kilometres than to try and negotiate the overgrown track that undulates next to it. So yeah, it just really becomes part of the walk. There are 2 rivers on the trail that are considered hazards, official hazards that you really have to think twice about. One is pretty much, there's 2 rivers beginning with R. Anyway, the Rangata, so you've got a chance of crossing, but it's a massive braided river, which it took me 2 hours to cross. It's like, a dozen rivers in one, basically. So it's this shapeshifter that changes with the water flow. And you might cross the first couple of braids and then get stranded in the middle if the water level's too high in the next one. So that one does take some thought and planning and some local knowledge. And the other river, you just got to hitchhike around, basically.
You met a batch of characters on your through hike. They were all on their journey, and I'm interested in your thoughts on the depth of friendship on these characters you meet on a through hike versus just how you make friendships in the you can work at an office for 5 years and have a different type of friendship. And there's probably lots of listeners that have never been on a through hike. How would you describe these through hike friendships?
Yeah, it's interesting. The trail puts you in close contact with people that you might never normally come across in everyday life, or that you know, maybe you have vastly different personalities or interests maybe, but the trail throws you all in together and you have this one common experience. And if you're walking together with somebody for a day or days or weeks, you're with them all the time, not just during the day, but when you get to camp at night. And, you know, there's no TV or other distractions, so you just talk about life and yourself. And so you end up revealing things that you would not normally do in a pub in town. So, yeah, it's really interesting. And I think also the shared challenge, you know, when people have shared challenging times together, it does bond you a bit more. You know, you've got this shared experience, basically. So yeah, it's really interesting.
And while you're doing the walk, can you think back to like a favorite part? I'm not talking about a specific day or a specific view, but just, is there a feeling from doing, you know, these 5 months that you found really drawn to, or that you can put into words?
I guess, you know, I've never been happier than I was on that trail, with just one bag of belongings, one outfit, no makeup, no mirrors, no media. And it was just so blissfully happy. And I had this epiphany in a hut in the South Island. I was, I don't know, probably about 500 Ks from the end, and I was starting to feel the anxiety come back, and I thought, no, this can't be. And I just sort of, you know, said to myself, what is this all about? And this voice just popped up in my head and said, I'm scared of not being me. And I just immediately, I thought, that's it. You know, I don't want to go back to my old life. And I thought, well, I don't have to. You know, no one's got a gun to my head. I can just continue on using this courage that I did on the trail to change my life when I get back. And that's what I did. But I guess it was that realization that the trail gave me. The trail gave me confidence, and it gave me the peace and the space to start to tune into my gut and my, you know, what was inside me. So that made me feel incredibly light. And so middle of the South Island, or actually a lot of the South Island, I felt so light in being. And I would laugh at stupid things and sing a lot, and it was just a really happy, freeing time.
Have you been able, you know, it's 10 years on, you've changed, you know, lots has gone on. Do you feel you still, has that lightness kind of kept in your, you know, your personality, or did the return to regular life kind of, you know, dampen much of that?
Yeah. Look, it's hard to hang on to that when you're surrounded by a whirlpool in everyday life. And I did for a couple of years, because I came back and I quit my corporate job. I always knew I wanted to write a book about this story. So I thought I'll just give myself a year out to write it. And so I was just bouncing from one thing to the next, house sitting here, there, and everywhere, volunteering. I went to the Solomon Islands in the South Pacific, lived in this little thatched bungalow over the water for a couple of months, just volunteering and writing. So, you know, I had no money at that time, but I felt rich because I was just living an inspired life and doing what I wanted. And it turns out if you don't spend a lot of money, you don't need a lot of money. So I didn't have a house or a car or nothing to maintain, just food. And I was staying in places that let me stay for free. So I could hang on to that feeling for quite a while. But then, you know, I started writing for magazines and newspapers, and that turned into a full-time job. And then you get deadlines and stress. And yeah, I'm at a point now where I need to have a rethink and remind myself of where I want to be. And I don't want to be so busy that I forget who I am or where I'm headed. So I need to bring some of that balance back into my life again. But yeah, I can drop into it. If I go for a day hike, I can drop into that feeling much quicker than I could before. So once you know what something feels like, it's easier to return to. So, if I just go for a 3-day hike now in amongst nature, I just immediately feel that peace and calm come over me again.
And so people who live busy lives, do you think there is a way that they can incorporate that feeling of nature without having to, go on holiday for 3 or 4 days? Is there something you found that you can do on a daily basis that helps do that? Or is it really just this, this focus on recharging? And it sounds crazy, go hike for a week and you'll be recharged, because it sounds like hard work to most people. But is that the only solution?
Maybe it's not even so much the hiking, but the Japanese coined the term forest bathing. Probably if you do that, that's all about mindfully sitting in nature and touching the earth and smelling the earth and noticing all the details around you. So it's basically mindfulness in nature. So I suppose you could do that, just go into a forest, but instead of walking through it and thinking about your to-do list, be present where you are and notice all the details. Everything else will fall away, and it'll be like a meditation, which is well known to lower your stress levels and give you clarity.
Actually, I have a question. Do you count your steps when you hike?
No. It's not important for me.
I do it. My mind just goes that way. And I was talking to an author who, I guess there's all these studies that actually when you're hiking and you're not talking with somebody, a lot of people start counting their steps. And that's, a form of meditation, counting your breaths. And there's all this research now that's showing that, doing a walk when you're not talking has a lot of meditative aspects. And you could have mentioned it right there. And I feel that sometimes where I come out of a walk and I just feel like a new person. I think, how the heck does, walking the mountain 6 hours have this much impact? And then you think, oh, I've never done a 6-hour meditation. I find 15 minutes hard. I feel great after 15 minutes. But, is that just part of it, that we let our minds just zone out?
That's it. And it takes a while sometimes, especially if you come from a busy life and you go on the trail. Sometimes I find it easier to listen to music first, because then at least I'm focusing on one thing. I'm focusing on the music. And then I take the music away and just listen to the sounds of the land, because it's very easy. You might, the monkey mind wants to start swinging off other ideas in your head. But if you can just start by focusing on one thing and then take that away and just let the space happen. Yeah, it's definitely like a meditation. But like you say, sitting cross-legged in a room on a pillow for 15 minutes, super hard work. Hike all day and just focus, be mindful of what's around you. That is way easier. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's wild how that is. So you did this walk and it changed your life. But do you ever think back to, you had a successful corporate career? Do you ever think back and wonder what your life would be like if you hadn't done this? You just kept along the corporate, the corporate path that so many people do, and they don't go walk 3,000 kilometers and have this epiphany?
Yeah, it's a total spin out. It's funny. There was a lady on the trail that I walked with for about a month from Germany, and we met up again in New Zealand, coincidentally, about 3 years after the hike. And we had dinner, and then she messaged me the next day and she said, I almost didn't recognize you. She said, you look more like you, if that makes sense. And I thought, that makes complete sense, because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm being me as well. And I thought, how scary is that without that hike, I was mid-40s when I started it. Without that hike, I could feasibly have gone through an entire life just existing and doing what was expected of me, and not actually living to my potential and doing something that fits me and my psyche. I get bored easily. I want to travel. I don't want to get up at the same time every day. I want variety, and now I've found a life as a full-time travel writer and speaker, where I don't have to do the same thing, and I'm in control of my life, and I don't have to go to a particular office every day. And so that trip just fundamentally changed the course of my life. And, I wanted to write a book since I was in primary school. and you just don't do it. It's like who writes a book? It's a very challenging thing to get published. And but after that hike, I thought I'll just try, and that's something I've taken through the rest of my life. Just try. And I'd wanted to be a travel writer for years, but I just thought about it as too difficult. But then I thought, just try, and now that's my full-time job as well. So, it's kind of wild how a trip can change you.
Why do you think, you mentioned, you're living a life based on expectations, and they were your expectations. You as a kid, you wanted to write a book. Why do you think so many of us, I did something similar in my life. I talked to a lot of people that are in jobs or careers they hate, but they've built a life that they can't give up the paycheck. Why do you think this path hits so many people where they're doing something that they don't like?
Have you heard of that old story that if you get a baby, look, I might be getting this wrong, but the gist will be right. If you get a baby elephant and, chain it up as a baby, it will not, it can't move. And then as an adult, it could totally break that chain and walk away, but it doesn't, because it still thinks that it's confined. And I think in our lives, we don't realize that we've got choices, and we just stick on the tram tracks and, go on the path of least resistance. And it does take courage and energy to veer off the tracks of expectation and what you're doing. But I can tell you, when I quit my corporate job, I thought, am I crazy? I'm giving up it's a good job. I was working for a leisure tourism company that ran a ski resort. I got a free ski season pass. I had a great boss. I thought, am I crazy giving this up in my mid-40s to chase the dream of being a writer, which seemed kind of crazy. But as soon as I did it, I thought, oh my God, why didn't I do this sooner, And it's, I think we don't realize that we have choices sometimes, and it does take bravery to take that leap. But when you do it, I know people who take leaps and, rarely do people regret it. It's more, wow, the blinkers get taken off and you realize there's so many options in life that you can choose to take.
I think that is just an incredible message to end this discussion on, because I think that's just so powerful, and the analogy of the baby elephant. And there is so much we don't realize. I think going back in my life, like there's all these things I could have done when I was in university or younger. And it was almost like you don't realize you can do those things. It's not just other people. And I want to say congrats on your book. It's an enthralling read. It's one of those books, you just want to keep reading it again and again, or read every page. You don't want to put it down. And it's on Kindle, so you don't even have to worry about having a physical book. You can get it and read it this weekend. So I want to say thanks for coming on the podcast, Laura.
Thanks very much for having me, Richard. It's been great.
And if people want to follow along either with your journey or find you on social media, how can they find you?
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram. So it's Laura Waters _writer. That's where most of my travels are. And then I've got a website, soultrekkers.com.au. That's SOUL trekkers.com.au.
Excellent. I'll put links to both of those in the show notes, as well as a link for your book on Amazon. And I can't recommend the book enough. It's a great story about a fun trip, but also there's a lot of other stuff in there, like what we talked about. So it's not just purely a book about an adventure. It's about, about life and making a decision about how you want to live it, which I think is really powerful. With that, I want to say thanks to everyone for listening to the show again this week. We'll be back next week to explore the world and hear about more epic adventures. Listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music at amazon.com/10adventures.